Should we study film music in the same way we study classical music? This is one of those questions where some will strongly say yes and others strongly say no. Considering we currently only study classical music, I want to take a look at how film music is viewed by some and also explore the potential advantages of studying film music. I'm also going to compare a few things to what I was taught in university and grad school as well, so it's possible your education would be different. Considering there is a lot of ground to cover, I divided it up into sections. Probably the biggest comment I hear about film music is that these composers, quote, steal classical work, so it's not original. By extension, this means that we study this rep already. First, about the stealing, I made a video about how all music is a remix, but the short version is that while there are examples of movie soundtracks sounding very similar to classical pieces, it's most likely because the director wanted the music to be similar to the temp tracks. This argument also ignores the fact that the composers, quote, steal music all the time, starting with the earliest form of polyphony with Leonin and Perotin using existing music as their cantus firmus. And composers since have used both past material and reused their own work. So these film composers aren't doing anything that composers have never done before. If you also consider the total number of film music songs out there compared to how many similarities have been found to past music, that's a very, very small portion. A big example that shows how low this type of music is viewed for some musicians is a comment about video game music. Slightly off topic, but related. I won't say the group or conductor I was with, but the comment was this. Have you noticed all video game music is the same 4 tempos? My immediate response in my head was, not if you go the right tempos, especially since it was very clear the conductor didn't know the music. This is easily proven by looking at some of the top video game music. Looking at the iconic menu themes from a single series, we get Smash Melee at 154 BPM, Let's take a look at a single game as well. Mario Kart 8 has 48 tracks, plus a menu theme, course intro, and credits. How many different tempo markings do you think there are? Considering this is a racing game, you'd expect all to be upbeat and somewhat similar. Here's my chart of all their tempos. Not even close to 4, and ranging from 98, or 112 if you don't want to include the course intro music, to 208. Yes, the tempo fluctuates on these tracks, so this chart is only the average tempo from the first few bars. The mentality that all video game music is the same 4 tempos is the same as me saying all classical music is the same 4 tempos. It does not make any sense whatsoever. Anyway, that's just one real-world example of the mentality that musicians might have. So let's take a look at another. An individual, who I will not name, asked the question, why? Why perform movies live? Here are the arguments given, but these are common among those against the idea I'm exploring here, so it's worth going through. This argument suggests we only see movies once. There are plenty of people that weren't even born yet, so they couldn't experience some of these movies, like Star Wars, in theaters. Now they have that chance with a live orchestra. Plus, an argument pressed in schools is for students to go hear live concerts, as the experience is so much different than listening to the piece in your bedroom. The same applies here. I would also ask the question in response. Do you only listen to a classical work only once? Are the audience for a concert only there because they have never heard the works on that concert before? Why are they there in the first place when they could just listen to them at home for free? I was scheduled to play Tchaikovsky 5 3 times in one season. I've played The Firebird twice in one season, Sibelius 2 twice in a season. This argument doesn't make any sense. If the problem is that film soundtracks are being performed over and over again, so are the classical works. Even if you want to show that Star Wars was done 30 times in the US alone, I'm sure you could find that Beethoven 5 was performed more often. Another argument that doesn't make any sense. This is true for operas as well as some symphonies where the low brass doesn't play until the last movement. In Beethoven 9, the trombones play for maybe 20 bars in the second movement and then not again until the end of the fourth movement. So if the argument is that we shouldn't perform movies live because the orchestra sits for 2 hours and only playing 30 minutes, then we shouldn't perform Beethoven 9 at all. While on Beethoven, let's nix the 5th Symphony too, trombones only play in the last movement. While I'm fully aware the 30-minute number was most likely not meant to be accurate, I will still pose the challenge. Find me a soundtrack of a movie performed live that is only 30 minutes of music. I think the longest break between cues from movies I've done is about 5 minutes. And to really show the craziness of that 30 minutes number, in E.T., the final chunk of music is about 20 minutes of non-stop playing. Less than a quarter of that is the credits. But I'm sure the other hour and a half of the movie has only 10 minutes of music total. Just by looking up the soundtrack for any of these movies shows over an hour of music. And remember that this isn't everything from the movie. For Star Wars, there exist 2 CD sets. And there's also full soundtracks for the Lord of the Rings movies, hitting over 3 hours of music for each movie. My initial response was that the repetitiveness is no different than that of Wagner, but if this person says it proves their point, then let's go deeper. Classical composers wrote rondos, and this rondo by Mozart is fairly well known, but it's super repetitive. What about composers that wrote in sonata rondo form? Those repeat melodies all over the place. Some concerti have an exposition, then a development where ideas from the exposition are then taken and altered before coming to the recapitulation where everything is pretty much repeated in its original form. Isn't that a bit repetitive? Star Wars themes have been greatly documented, no one greater than Frank Lehman. If we take one of the more iconic motives from Star Wars, how many times would you say it appears in the films? This short, iconic horn solo that appears probably more than anything else appears about 18 times in the original 1977 movie. While this sounds like a lot, let's compare that to the Ode to Joy theme from the last movement of Beethoven 9. How many times does that theme play in this 20-minute movement? It's played 9 times, mostly in the first 10 minutes of the movement. So this short motive from Star Wars is done 18 times in 2 hours. But the very long theme is done 9 times in 20 minutes. That's more repetitive, if you ask me. I really want to know where this argument comes from. It again does not make any sense. More and more orchestras are adding in a film series to their seasons. Originally, these concerts were tours, not unlike the Symphony of the Goddess, Pokemon Evolution, Video Games Live, Game of Thrones, etc. But now, more orchestras are performing them on their own and growing. I've been hired to perform a movie soundtrack live and more performances were added due to high ticket sales. But the novelty has worn off. I will be fair and say that I have been hired to do a movie soundtrack with 3 performances scheduled, but 2 of them have been cancelled. So this does happen too, however, it's still very well attended in comparison to the classical concerts. This comment is a very purist comment. Orchestras should only perform classical symphonies only, anything else is degrading. And if you think that's a stretch for me to make, how does performing a movie live do our craft a disservice? Our jobs as musicians are to perform and entertain an audience. Of course, a movie soundtrack audience will be different than a classical audience, but isn't that a good thing? You are expanding your services to more people. This is like saying I will only perform symphonies between 1800 and 1900. That doesn't make any sense. Now, it's true that musicians will take certain concerts off because they don't care for the rep being performed, and that's 100% okay. What's not okay is saying the orchestra as a whole should never perform certain music. But believe it or not, some people, like this person, is okay with some movie music. This person just proved a major part of society that I feel we all need to be aware of. Each time a new thing comes out, kids love it and the adults hate it. It's the old cliche of, back when I was your age. Seriously, music from the 60s was compared to devil music.
Generations are usually just old people talking about young people, and when we look at the history of talking about generations in this country, it's the same story over and over again. Here's a famous Life magazine article about the baby boomers from 1968, and the writer said, even as I said it, I knew the phrase, to make a living, could have absolutely no meaning to these children of the affluent society. This is an article from 1985 worrying that the new generation was becoming self-obsessed because they were filming themselves on their brand new mobile devices, right? 1990, 20-something, laid back, late blooming, or just lost, complaining that Gen Xers are entitled and don't want to work for a living, all the way up to this Time magazine piece of from 2013, which, by the way, this is clearly a ripoff of the Tom Wolfe article from 1976. It's a direct quote of it.
Good luck finding many people today saying that the Beatles were not a major influence on popular music. Yet, if you ask the adults from the 60s,
that two-beat pattern is the music brought to the United States of America by the communist conspiracy to corrupt teenagers, and it's in every rock and roll number.
The obscenity and vulgarity of the rock and roll music.
I was informed about a concert experience where the orchestra performing the movie live was placed in full darkness and mixed well with the movie. So the experience was like going to a theater with a great sound system. This does indeed take away from the live orchestra to a degree. I believe the orchestra should be mixed a little higher than normal too. An idea to remedy this problem could be to place cameras around the orchestra and shown on a screen to the side, highlighting certain sections during big moments. This places some more attention back on the orchestra. I will admit this was not my idea, but I really like it. This comment can be taken two ways, so let's address both. First, we have the general idea that no film music was intended to be performed live. This part is not true. Depending on the composer, movie, and when the composer is brought on for the film, there might actually be music written for concert performances early on. Several John Williams movie scores had suites written for them, like Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, with its 9-part suite. Certain themes can also be written, like the prologue to Hook or the theme to Jurassic Park, that don't actually appear in the movie. This isn't true for all movies, of course. Danny Elfman is the easiest example, where he makes a mock-up for a demo to send to the director. Then it's orchestrated and sent into the studio. But Elfman doesn't conduct his own movies. He stays in the booth where you hear what the audience is going to hear. This means he approaches it with the idea that it will be for the home or theater viewing only, and not a live performance, since it will sound different. What about the second part? That's the idea that the movie soundtracks as a whole were never meant to be performed live. This is absolutely true. They never were for the most part once the talkies hit in the 1930s, and required hours upon hours to edit and set up to be able to be performed live. From the streamer program, as well as mixing in certain electronic music that won't be performed live, to writing additional music in 2 cases that I'm aware of. But to me, this is a poor reason as to why we shouldn't perform them live. Some movies will certainly be difficult to be done, but so are certain operas and symphonies that we perform all the time. Let me know if I missed any common views against film music. As you might imagine, this topic really fascinates me. How different are film soundtracks from classical? Music is music, right? In very much the same way that we wouldn't perform a Mozart symphony the same way we would a Mahler, the same goes for film. You shouldn't approach a Hans Zimmer concert the same way you would a John Williams. One of the biggest excerpts horn players are taught is the solo in Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. Before the concert was cancelled, I was finally booked to play principal on that piece, having only performed assistant on it prior. For this solo, I have received many comments on ways to improve it from various lessons, both in school and in my professional career. I've put a lot of work into this excerpt, and yet, It was only called on one audition that I've taken, and I have yet to actually perform the solo. I have many colleagues in principal positions that have never and probably will never perform that solo. Compare this to horn solos from John Williams' music. I've performed Leia's theme in Jurassic Park multiple times each, but those were never actually taught to me, and I received no feedback from the director during the rehearsals as well. Why are these solos treated as less important, yet are performed more? Let's take a look at a few examples of the Jurassic Park opening solo from a few performances I found on YouTube to explain this issue. The reason for this is because this solo does not appear in the movie at all. It's 100% for the soundtrack only and live performances, yet is so iconic, the average Joe would recognize it. Now let's hear John Williams conducting it. Do you hear a difference? The difference is in the dynamics and style. The first call should be a medium volume, the second should be an echo, and the third is the call again but not as loud and leads into the rest of the intro. In the soundtrack, there's a compressor on the track, so the volume is about the same, but you can hear the timbre difference of the horn playing it a little bit softer. In many prints of this opening theme, the echo is not listed at all, and that's also true for these performances. Wouldn't you say that echo is very important? If not, let's look at this classical example. I've been told by multiple teachers that this very short one-measure crescendo in the Beethoven 6 horn excerpt is very important. So what makes that more important than the echo in Jurassic Park opening? More so that you can't even hear the crescendo on the reference recordings here on hornexcerpts.org. In my opinion, we should be performing any music to the best of our abilities, as close to the style it was originally written and intended. Taken to the extreme, this performance actually had the hornist play the echo call stopped to sound more like an actual echo. While I disagree with the decision, I very much appreciate that they really recognized the echo. This, of course, is not a one example occurrence. Another few examples of strange performance of movie soundtracks come from the City of Prague Philharmonic. The flute solo in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is performed at a much slower tempo. While a slight variation in tempo is fine, this is far too big of a change if you ask me. The style of the beginning of the track is also a little questionable. What is this music accompanying? Aside from knowing that it's meant for the Quidditch match, the music was quickly compared to the Firebird. That opening chord, in my opinion anyway, shouldn't be held out like that and actually sound similar to the Firebird. Another quick example from the City of Prague Philharmonic is their recording of the Kraken from Pirates 2, where the horn line is not the same notes as the soundtrack. The balance is all weird too, and there's this funky piano part right before it as well. To me, it just sounds off. I don't mean to pick on just the City of Prague Philharmonic, but those were easy examples to prove my point. To give one last example that is not that group, we can take a look at the publications of Scherzo for X-Wings. While it's a single note, it's not the same as the soundtrack. The movie also has some weird cuts in it as well that sound off when you know the track well. David Macaulay posts wonderful study scores of pieces, and his of this work shows the wrong horn note. And most performances I could find on YouTube have the wrong note. The few exceptions, like Galactic Empire, Scott Sutherland, Trumpet Man, although in the wrong key, Di Gasparotto, again in the wrong key, and of course my own. This list of wrong performances does include one that I performed on, the Dallas Wins CD, John Williams at the Movies. I brought up the note difference because I think it's correct to play it up an octave, but it was decided best to leave it down the octave. Even John Williams' sketch for the piece indicates the lower octave, so we know it was originally intended that way. But what classical composer do we stick to their sketch versions over the final published work? There are many other examples of soundtracks and advantages to studying them, but these are the general ideas of what can crop up. There are many excerpts for different instruments that would be a perfect addition to study, from Leia's theme for horns, JFK for trumpets, The Terminal for clarinets, Harry Potter 3 for flutes, maybe Wrath of Khan for tubas. These are just examples from my horn player head, but I'm sure experts on those instruments could name some better options. So what soundtracks do you think should be studied more? Also, what are your thoughts on studying the performance aspect of film music? Is it worth it, or should we just stick to the traditional education we are currently doing? Let me know in the comments down below. Studying film music from a compositional standpoint is a great way for new and upcoming composers to learn what modern techniques are being used. Similar to how all composers learned and grew from those before them, we can do the same today. While the leitmotif is attributed to Wagner and maybe a few examples are given, it is not explored further in the educational setting and not through film music. In film, there are different factors that can crop up that would be more beneficial to study. Star Wars is seemingly the easiest example. This Force theme here was originally Ben Kenobi's theme.
This music right here, this is not the Force theme. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi's theme.
Don't be afraid. Oh, don't worry, he'll be alright.
But Ewan McGregor here dies in the first film, so when the unexpected sequel comes around, i.e. The Empire Strikes Back, whenever something Force-related happens, because the audience's only connection to the Force was through Mr. Hello There, there's now this recontextualized association with this music and the Force, instead of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hear me. Leia.
This is no longer Obi-Wan's theme, this is now the Force theme.
Luke's theme is also in this category, later becoming the theme to the series.
And that same thing happened to Luke's theme. Originally, it was both the main theme for Star Wars and Luke's theme because he was the hero of this story. And now we just all know it as the main theme for Star Wars, and Luke has somewhat lost his musical identity, just because the music kept playing at the start and end of 6 films where he didn't show up as the main character.
We can explore this further by looking at the use of the original trilogy motifs in the sequel trilogy, and see how much the studio decided to influence the music over the composer, creating a problem.
Let's look at right here when Luke lifts up the X-Wing. What is this? Why are we doing this? This is Yoda's theme. Why are we playing Yoda's theme here? Why are we playing Yoda's theme right here? It just doesn't make any sense. But you see, it's not just Yoda's theme.
Yoda lifts it in The Empire Strikes Back. Romero Belgart, the music editor, he said, it should be exactly the music that we had for Yoda. And actually, JJ questioned it. He said, should we be doing that right? And everybody said, yes, it has to be. It's, the fans will all know it.
So this could serve two purposes: having film soundtracks that are well scored with great motivic writing, and those that don't, and explore why. Much more educational than sticking to Wagner. A type of analysis that was new to me until recently is the Neo-Riemannian theory, used in Frank Lehman's book, Hollywood Harmony. The idea behind this type of analysis is to look at chordal transformation and how they work. I highly recommend Frank's book as I'm still working my way through it and don't want to misrepresent it. But a simpler way to see how these transformations work is to look at these channels that talk about how to fake looking like a film composer. Just taking two chords going back and forth, you can evoke a certain feeling, something that could be useful to learn, right? While many of the composers we study in school stick to certain rule sets, that is pretty much abandoned, and rather going with a strict rule set of writing, composers go with what's in their head, and even some do not even have formal training in composition, like Danny Elfman. He scored Pee-wee's Big Adventure having only learned to transcribe music a few years prior. That's it. To be fair, composers like Henry Jackman have an insane amount of training, including how to write like Palestrina given only a few bars to start. Most composers will stick to a standard orchestral setup, and so we don't see much variety. Of course, there's the oddball 7 horns in Mahler 1, the lack of instruments in Shostakovich Concerti, etc. But for film soundtracks, they use very specific instrumentation for different scenes, and it's worth studying why that works. Why the flute here, or just the strings there? You see more of that in film than you do in stage compositions like symphonies. I'm not saying that they don't exist, like the horn being characterized as Till in Till Eulenspiegel, or the hero in Ein Heldenleben. While motivic writing is a classic technique from Wagner that is found in film scores, other types of writing are present in modern film music as well. While studying about the 12-tone matrix in school, it seemed to be a fad that lasted only a short while, but since it falls into a classical style and technique, we are taught it. But who has used a 12-tone matrix recently and to great effect? The score to The Matrix. Film music is compared to late Romantic composers and are downplayed because of that. But it seems like The Matrix just flew under the radar for music educators as a fantastic modern example of its use. I was very lost when it came to modes in school. I couldn't remember anything about them, like their names, how they worked, anything. Why? Because they never taught how they were used or showed examples. Funny enough, Classic FM, boasting to be the largest classical music radio station in the world, can't even stick to classical examples when showing examples of modes. While there are of course classic examples of modes, what's the problem with using modern examples? Film music of course comes to the rescue here, and since I've mentioned John Williams a lot already, I'll avoid his music in giving examples of each scale or mode. The Dorian Mode can be found in The Lord of the Rings, the initial statement of the Rohan theme by Howard Shore. The Phrygian mode is all over The Nightmare Before Christmas. Here's an example in Sally's song, music by Danny Elfman.
I sense there's something in the wind.
Lydian is all over soundtracks, but here's an example from the Spitfire Grill, music by James Horner. An example of the mixed Lydian scale can be found in Jerry Goldsmith's theme to Star Trek: The Motion Picture. While on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the cloud has the hexatonic scale used. For a good example of the octatonic scale, The Sixth Sense by James Newton Howard uses it. And of course, we got the 12-tone matrix used by Don Davis in The Matrix. There are plenty more examples to uncover. Given that sometimes composers are given only a few weeks to score a film, it's insane at how well they are able to keep everything together and use these techniques that we are barely even taught. So much can be learned from picking apart these scores, so I truthfully find it hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some form of benefit coming from studying this modern music. Even if you want to go against the idea of having many composers writing the same movie, you could analyze the score and show why. An idea I might do, as this does intrigue me. It will come as no surprise that I support the addition of studying more modern music in school. We learn very much in a traditional style and haven't really upgraded. And with this conclusion to my 3-part series, I want to hear from you. What arguments have I not addressed or perhaps missed? Do you agree or have more supporting arguments? Let me know down in the comments, and I will of course see you next time.